Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CODAHEA Hydrogen Talk for the month of February. Today, we have a very interesting topic that we are going to be discussing. Our topic this morning will be the minimized green hydrogen production in the European catchment area. And our speaker would be Dr. Lucas Sens from the University of Hamburg. I will introduce him later. But before we go into that, I will have Professor Brando give us a short introduction about CODAHEA, what we stand for, what we do, and thereafter I'll introduce our speaker and panelists. So over to you, Dr. Brando. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Olufeso. Thank you, guests and speakers and panelists. We've been running this Hydrogen Talk series for the past 3 months now, and it's been quite an enlightening process, not just for us as a consortium, but also for the guests at this event. CODAHEA stands for the Consortium for the Development and Advancement of a Hydrogen Economy in Africa. Amongst the work we do in building capacity in getting hydrogen to the forefront, not just within the research and development groups in Africa, but also in the policy-making groups in Africa. We see the upskilling and the uptake of advanced knowledge within the continent as a critical aspect of our work. There's so much we can learn from the Europeans. They've really worked hard in trying to develop the roadmap from wherever they are today in terms of their energy mix, transiting towards a net zero emission platform. Africa can look at that roadmap and see how we can rejig it, see how we can reformulate it, and see how we can prepare it for an Africa-specific solution. And I'm really happy that Dr. Sens has taken some time to be with us today to give us an insight into what is going on in Europe in terms of hydrogen, green energies, and renewable energies. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brando. Appreciate the intro. Welcome to the rest of the team that have just joined the webinar. I'm just about to introduce my speaker and panelists. So as we can see, we have Dr. Lucas Sens. He's the group lead, hydrogen and derivatives, and his focus topics are typically around hydrogen and its derivatives. Some other expertise that he specializes in are renewable energy carriers for the transportation and energy systems. He works at the Hamburg University of Technology in the sector of the Institute of Environmental Technology and Energy Economics. Like I said, he's located in Hamburg. And Dr. Lucas is currently the group leader at the Institute. He attained a bachelor's degree in energy and environmental engineering from Hamburg University of Technology, and then an MSc in energy and environmental engineering from the Hamburg University of Technology, as well as the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Norway. He has several publications, has articles, and book contributions in the area of techno-economic aspects of energy, hydrogen, and its derivatives. So Dr. Lucas, welcome to you. Just give us a wave of the hand so everybody can see who you are.
Yeah, thank you very much for the nice introduction. And
thank you. Thank you.
Should I continue?
No, I'll go ahead and introduce the other panelists, and then we'll get right into it. So, our other panelists are, bear with me a second, Dr. Cecil Morrow Umar. Dr. Cecil, are you there? Yep, you got your camera on. Thank you so much. So Dr. Cecil is a research scientist who focuses on the topics liquid organic hydrogen carriers hydrogen storage, catalysis, fuel cell, PEM, and AAEM. Now, those of you who are in the sector know what all those acronyms mean, and you're going to see a lot of acronyms on this session, so bear with us. Some of his other expertise are energy value chains and energy defossilization, energy innovation. So I'm sure Dr. Umar is in really high demand because as the world talks about defossilization, his skills come in very handy. So he's based with Hydrogen South Africa, and he really majors in chemical engineering. So a short bio on Dr. Umar is he's an energy transition enthusiast with a PhD degree in physics. And he currently is pursuing a Master of Management in Energy Leadership degree with Wits Business School in South Africa. He is a Next Einstein Forum Fellow and currently is based at the Hydrogen South Africa, which is the High SA Infrastructure Center of Competence as a researcher. Has a NEF Fellow, NEF being the Next Einstein Forum. His NEF challenge is to leverage current research on energy materials and associated technologies to advance affordable and small off-scale grid technologies for rural and peri-urban settlements in Africa. He believes, however, that a sustainable energy future must not be a threat to the livelihoods and ways of life, and thus the need for just transition, despite the need for defossilization of energy, is critical. His interests span research and development along the energy value chain through niche experimentation, rapid prototyping, application of systems thinking to varied energy scenarios, and energy technology innovation systems. So Dr. Umar, welcome to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So next, I'm going to introduce Dr. Kingsley Obodo. He's a scientist, and his focus topics are typically catalysis, computational modeling of materials, physics, material science. Other expertise of his include philosophy and 3D printing technologies. He's currently at the Northwest University Potchefstroom, South Africa, and he's in the educational sector. A short bio on Dr. Kingsley Onyebuchi Obodo is that he's an accomplished author, highly regarded and seasoned computational condensed matter of physics researcher with the National Research Foundation of South Africa rating of C2. He holds an undergraduate degree in physics and electronics technology from the Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Accra, Nigeria, and a master's degree in material science from the African University of Science and Technology, Abuja, Nigeria. He also holds a PhD in physics from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. He's currently employed with the Northwest University and under the Hydrogen Infrastructure Project. It's a center of competence where his research is primarily focused on the development of next generation green and catalytic materials for hydrogen and technologies. The research entails the application of computational materials design prediction and search in 1D, 2D, and 3D systems. Needless to say, Dr. Kingsley Obodo is really an expert in his field. And if any of you are interested in knowing his background, then I would encourage you to go to the CODAHEA website and you will find his profile there. So without much ado, Dr. Kingsley, welcome. I am in no way shortchanging your accomplishments. They are to be celebrated, but I want to dive into the conversation because I think we're going to have a lot of questions on the session. So in terms of, yeah.
No, thank you very much.
You're most welcome, sir. So without much ado, I'll go into housekeeping rules. So I'll appreciate it if everyone could have the videos off, excluding my speakers and panelists. Panelists, if you want to switch off your videos, you're welcome to do so, but I'll have you come back on when we have the question and answer session. In terms of questions and answers, when we get to the panelist session, the protocol would be that you ask your questions at the end of the session, of the presentation. You could either ask your questions by dropping them in the chat or raising your hands to signal that you want to have a question. That is my preferred mode of questioning. So I think it's better when people ask their questions specifically, because then they package it in a way that, you know, the speaker will understand. So if you do have a question, indicate by the raising up of your hands. I will spotlight you and say you're going to be on. I will unmute you, and then you can go ahead and ask your question. So without much ado, I'll hand over the session to Dr. Sens for his presentation. Dr. Sens, you're on. Thank you.
Perfect, and thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to share my screen. So just give me 1 second to do so. And now you should be able to see my screen. Is it right?
Super, you're on.
Perfect. Okay, yeah. As already introduced, today I would like to talk with you about the cost optimized hydrogen production by using wind power and photovoltaics. And here we will have like a specific look at the European catchment area, because as I was introduced, I'm sitting here at the Hamburg University of Technology, which is like the second biggest city in Germany. And therefore we have like more or less in this kind of project, the view of a hydrogen supply to Germany. And yeah, that's what I'm going to talk with you about the next minutes. And before I want to start with the content, let me just dive into the outline of my presentation. So first of all, I would like to talk with you like a little bit about the background, why we think we will need a lot of green hydrogen in the future. But I will keep it short because I think like the basics about hydrogen are you are already familiar with. Then second will be the system definition. So here, when we're talking about the green hydrogen production, we need to know what kind of system do we need and which are the components we're going to assess later when we showing our results, because the results is the third chapter. And in this kind of chapter, we will talk about the hydrogen production cost, which kind of cost we think we can achieve in the future. And we will also have like a specific view on let's say, the different hydrogen production costs in the different regions we have considered. Now, after all, because we will show like a lot of, let's say, colorful pictures and a lot of numbers, we will draw some key conclusions. So like, let's say the key takeaways of this kind of presentation. And of course, we will go from top to down through this outline. And to don't lose time, I would like just to start now with a background. And I would say like since 2 or 3 years, green hydrogen is like a very, very on vogue topic. And a lot of politics and researchers and CEOs are talking about this kind of energy carrier because it's expected that this kind of energy carrier will be like one of the cornerstones in the future to achieve like a zero emission society. And therefore, we can see that we have like different hydrogen demand projections. Here, it's the hydrogen demand projection from the DNV, and we can see that nowadays the hydrogen demand is basically based on refining and the production of methanol and of ammonia. But here we are most of the time using gray hydrogen, means we're using either natural gas or coal to produce our hydrogen, which we later use for ammonia, methanol, or the refining. However, in the future and with the climate targets we have, for example, in the European Union or in the United States, we need like a green energy carrier, not only for the production of ammonia and methanol, but also for other sectors. As we can see here, for example, for industrial heat, we can use hydrogen in large quantities to substitute like natural gas. And furthermore, also, for example, for the production of green fuels as ammonia or like of other, let's say, green gasoline and so on, we need like green hydrogen as a component to have like a climate neutral fuel. And another sector, for example, will be also the road transportation or aviation or even electricity generation. And we can see already that hydrogen has like a lot of application possibilities. And also due to the reason that green hydrogen is a molecule and we can produce it by using photovoltaic and wind power, it's an easily to store secondary energy carrier, and therefore it's expected that in the future the demand will grow. Of course, nobody knows how big will be the demand in the future, but if we take a look at all the projections, we can see that there's always like a doubling, or let's say a 10 times higher hydrogen demand than we have nowadays. And if we know that we will need like a lot of green hydrogen in the future, we can draw some research questions. And we have like the following here and the kind of presentation we want to answer. And the first one is about the cost. And in the end, also like in the economy, it's all also about cost. And here there's always this kind of magic number that that are stated that there are hydrogen costs below €2 in the future, that they are possible. And we want to take like a scientific perspective on these kind of costs and say, is it really realistic in the future? And we're going to answer these kind of questions later, what we think if we can achieve these kind of costs, and if we can achieve it in which kind of region we can have these kind of low green hydrogen production costs. And the second one, I was already talking about regions, is like which regions are the most favorable for green hydrogen supply to Germany, for example, because Germany is like a big are projected to be a big consumer of green hydrogen in the future, but we don't have a lot of space. So there are a lot of discussions about the hydrogen supply to Germany. So which kind of countries could supply, for example, Germany or the European Union with sufficient green quantities of green hydrogen. And the third one is like, what kind of influence do we have if we can implement salt caverns as hydrogen storage? Because salt caverns have a big potential for low-cost hydrogen storage. And in Northern Europe and in Western Europe, we have a lot of salt formation, which can be used as for hydrogen storage. And yeah, I will show you like the difference if we can implement salt caverns compared to not using salt caverns. What kind of let's say, what's the influence on the cost and yeah, on the system design for a green hydrogen supply. And last but not least, I was already talking a little bit about it, is the quantification of the technical production potential. And we want to see, okay, would be like a self-sufficient hydrogen production in Germany for Germany be possible or not? Because like in the, let's say in the last year, due to the energy crisis, we experienced that the dependency on other countries can come with also high political and economic risk. Okay, so these kind of 4 research questions are the main questions I would like to answer with this presentation. And to do so, we need to define our system. And here I want to shortly introduce you like our model and the key assumption we have taken for our green hydrogen production system. So, as I said, we want to use like the solar radiation and the wind speed to produce our green hydrogen. And therefore, we need like a photovoltaic plant and a wind power plant. And of course, depending on the location, we have like different solar radiation, for example. Like here in Germany, right now, we don't have a lot of solar radiation, while, for example, in the center of Algeria, we have like a very high solar radiation, and therefore for each location we consider like the different solar radiation and wind speeds. And yeah, based on these kind of power plants, we can produce the electricity by the PV panels or by the wind turbine, and this kind of electricity can be used to be fed into the electrolyzer. And as you may know, we can an electrolyzer uses like green or uses electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. And therefore, if we're going to use green electricity, we can produce green hydrogen with an electrolyzer. And of course, due to the natural fluctuation of photovoltaic, of solar radiation and wind speed, we also consider the opportunity to store energy, in this case, electricity into the battery. For example, in the night, if the sun is not shining, the battery could feed the electrolyzer. And also, due to the reason that we are doing like a cost minimization, it can be also beneficial to don't use, or if we have like excess electricity, to don't have like such big battery capacities, but it's better just to cut off the excess electricity, because maybe the cost of the battery will be higher than just cutting off the excess electricity. So this is also like another opportunity in our model. And of course, to produce the hydrogen, we need the water input into the electrolyzer. And after the hydrogen is produced by the electrolyzer, we need a compressor. And we need this kind of compressor to reach like the specific pressure level, because later on, we're going to feed in this kind of hydrogen either in a hydrogen pipeline or into a hydrogen storage, as you can see here. So, and since the hydrogen storage has like a higher pressure level, and also the hydrogen pipeline has a higher pressure level as the hydrogen, which is coming out of the electrolyzer, we need this kind of compressor to bridge this kind of pressure delta. And furthermore, in the end, we consider the hydrogen supply to Germany. So in this case, we're assuming a hydrogen pipeline network, which is able to transport the hydrogen from our production location to Germany, in this kind of case study. And furthermore, like about the input data, for example, for the solar radiation and wind speed, just for the record, we're using the ERA5 data set. So we have like an hourly resolution of our wind speed and of our solar radiation for each location we consider. And here we are assuming the profiles of the year 2012. Furthermore, the excess electricity, we don't put any other value to it. So we have like here an island system. And also for the hydrogen storage, I was already talking a little bit about the research question about it. In one scenario, we're assuming the pressure tank. And in the other scenario, we're assuming the use of a salt cavern storage. And for the hydrogen production in the end, it's very, very important point. We always consider an hourly constant hydrogen fed into the pipeline. What does it mean? So we don't produce our hydrogen not only just when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, but we're also using the storage. So in the end, we have like a constant hydrogen feed into the pipeline. So in the end, when hydrogen is used by the industry, they can have it like all the time in the year, because that's like a very, very important point. We cannot just have the energy when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, but for most of the industrial processes, they are based on a base load energy supply, and therefore here we assume a constant hydrogen supply fed into the pipeline, and therefore we need like the specific hydrogen storage capacities and or the specific electricity generation potential. Okay. And then we were talking about the optimization. Here you can see the system boundaries of our optimization. So this kind of whole system we have, and we will optimize it based on the lowest green hydrogen production cost possible. And to do so, like in this kind of specific scenario, we're assuming the parameters for the year 2035. This means like all the costs are based on the projections. What is the cost for a photovoltaic power plant in 2035? What are the costs for an electrolyzer in this kind of year, and so on. So we're not calculating the cost right away, but like 15 years or let's say 12 years in the future. And in the end, of course, this is like the mathematical function, what we're using for the cost minimization. So this is like the objective function, and we're using a linear optimization, but this is more like about the detailed research, and I don't want to dive too deep into this kind of topic. And now when we're talking about a hydrogen supply for Germany, here you can see the catchment area that we have assumed. And why did we assume this kind of this region or countries? It's because here we're assuming the pipeline transportation, because in the literature and in our own research, we have seen that the pipeline transportation of hydrogen is the lowest cost transportation option for large quantities, and if the distance is not too long. And therefore we choose in this kind of study this kind of regions. And yeah, later on we will talk about these different regions, so maybe try to keep them in mind when we're talking about for example Northern Europe. These kind of countries are considered, or for Central Europe, it's like France, Austria, and so on. Northern Africa, you can see here, and maybe also very important to name, we clustered the other regions which are part of Western, Central, and Eastern Africa, as well as here for Southern and Central Asia, just to don't have too many regions and to make it easier to understand. And in the end, we assume we always want to have our hydrogen in Germany. So it's not only the production and storage, but also the transportation. Okay, so far so good. Now I would like to dive into the results of our assessments. And as I said in the beginning, I mainly want to talk about the costs and potentials. However, if there are questions later, I'm also glad about talking about the specific system design. So for example, how many power of photovoltaic do we need in comparison to the electrolyzers, or how big are the storage capacities to bridge like the dark doldrums. So if you have questions about the technical design of the system and of the results of the optimization of the technical design, just ask them later, and I'm happy to talk about it. But here this kind of presentation, I'm just going to focus on the cost and potentials, just to don't, yeah, just to be in the time frame of this kind of presentation. And now you can see here on the left side, the hydrogen production cost we assessed for if we're using a pressure tank as a hydrogen storage. And you can see, like in the whole frame of Africa and of the Middle East here, the hydrogen production costs are significantly lower than, for example, in Europe. Just let me shortly explain this kind of graphics. You can see here the red color, which means, like, red means we have like low hydrogen production cost, and blue means we have high hydrogen production cost. So you can see here, for example, in Algeria, we can reach hydrogen production cost below €3, or here in the region of Western Sahara, it's even maybe around €2.50 per kilogram of hydrogen. While in the European Union, the costs are around €5 or €6, just due to the reason, or mainly due to the reason, that the solar radiation is way lower in Europe than compared to than in Africa or here in Western Asia. And when I'm talking here about the hydrogen production cost, as I stated further, and as you can see here in the footnote, but it's so important, and that's why I'm going to state it again. These kind of hydrogen production costs includes the costs for the electricity generation, for the compression, for the storage systems, and everything to fulfill an hourly constant hydrogen supply. So this is like a very big difference to maybe other studies which just say, okay, we produce the hydrogen when we have the energy. But here we assume that we want to have like a constant hydrogen supply for the industry. And this is in the end, from our point of view, the most important measurement, to have like a baseload hydrogen supply. And yeah, now also like maybe a very interesting fact, especially like for the European perspective, you can see, for example, in Italy or Spain, we have like the same hydrogen production cost than in Germany. Meanwhile, in Italy and Spain, the solar radiation is significantly higher already than in Germany. However, they do not have like the wind power resources that we have here. And therefore, even if we have less solar radiation due to the high wind speed in Germany and the favorable combination of solar radiation in the summer and high wind speed in the winter in Germany, and especially here at the Northern Sea, we can achieve relatively low hydrogen production costs. And also, for example, here the Netherlands or Denmark and so on, all these kind of countries can achieve relatively low hydrogen production costs due to the reason that they have like very good wind resources. Okay, and now I want to show you the second scenario, and here it's exactly the same scenario, just with one change. And instead of a pressure tank, here we're using a salt cavern as a hydrogen storage. What does it mean? A salt cavern storage is significantly lower in the hydrogen storage cost, and therefore we can see that here the overall picture changed significantly, and for the cost, especially for the European Union or for the European region. And why is it so? It's due to the seasonal fluctuation of the solar radiation and the wind speed in Europe. Like, for example, in Germany here in the summer, like in June and July, we have like a good solar radiation income, while in the winter, the solar radiation is almost zero. And therefore, we need like a lot of storage capacities to overcome like this kind of big lack of fluctuation and of the solar radiation. And therefore, if we're going to have like a cheaper storage, the hydrogen production costs will drop significantly, because bear in mind, as I said, in the end, we want the hydrogen production cost includes also the storage system to enable a constant hourly hydrogen supply. And therefore, for the European regions, the costs are dropping significantly. Meanwhile, here in Northern Africa, for example, the costs are also decreasing, but not as strong. And this is due to the reason that, for example, here in the south of Algeria, the solar radiation is relatively constant. So we don't have like this peak of seasonality, so that in the winter the sun is shining less than in the summer, but it's more or less constant. Therefore, we already don't need so many storage capacities, and the influence of using like lower cost salt cavern storage is not as big as, for example, here in Germany or Italy or Spain. And here in this kind of figure, we can see in the end, for most of the region, we can achieve cost of hydrogen production cost of around, let's say, €3. And yeah, this is significantly lower than for the first scenario where we are using pressure tanks. And just due to the reason that in the end, that we have like that we're going to share our slides, you can see here like a short summary of the main learnings in this kind of presentation. But yeah, I will skip this because I was already talking a lot about this kind of stuff. Okay, so now we were talking about the hydrogen production. Now, the second step is also the transportation. So not only the constant hydrogen supply at the production site, but also the transportation to Germany. And this kind of result is shown here. So in the first picture or figure here, you can see again the pressure tank scenario, which means again, we're using for the storage of hydrogen a pressure tank, and the transportation of the hydrogen is over a pipeline network. And we can see in this kind of case, if we want to have a supply of green hydrogen to Germany, the most favorable regions are either around the North Sea in Germany or in the Benelux states and Denmark, or an import over the northern African states, or even like here from other African regions, but especially in central Algeria and Western Sahara, for example, we can see the lowest hydrogen supply cost to Germany, even if we need to transport the hydrogen over such a long distance per pipeline, because the production costs are significantly lower than in the other regions, for example, in Europe. And now, if we consider again like the salt cavern storage scenario, we can see that the hydrogen supply costs are relatively similar and close together for all the regions. So takeaway here is like, if we can implement salt cavern scenario storage, the cost difference between the different regions is not so big, and they're coming closer, and maybe also like political dependencies will be less. And yeah, you can see, for example, here in the Northern Sea, the hydrogen production costs are on the same level than, for example, yeah, as the named regions in Algeria or Western Sahara, for example. And this is like a very important takeaway, especially like for the German or European energy strategy, that it's very important that we have access to low cost, not only low cost green energy, but especially also low cost storage options like salt caverns, just to overcome the seasonal fluctuation of the wind speed and the solar radiation. And again, here you can see also the same summary for these kind of slides, but I was already talking about this. And now I would like to talk not only about the cost, but about the hydrogen supply potential and especially the production potential. And in this figure here, you can see, let me shortly explain also this kind of figure. You can see on the x-axis the technical hydrogen supply potential to Germany in a logarithmic scale. So here, keep attention, it's like 1 million ton, then it's 10 million tons, and then it's already 100 million tons. So it's not scaling like linear, but logarithmic. And on the y-axis, you can see the hydrogen supply cost to Germany. And here on the top, you can see the differentiation between the pressure tank scenario and the salt cavern scenario. And how can you read this kind of figure? For example, in this kind of graph, you can see the line for Germany, and you can see, okay, I can supply 10 million tons of Germany of hydrogen to Germany for costs then less than €3.50, and this in Germany. And another example, for example, let's take the pressure tank scenario. Here we can see, okay, we could supply around, let's say, 30 million tons of green hydrogen to Germany, and we can produce it also in Germany for costs then less than €5. And here we can add up also the different regions. So here, for example, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, and Western Europe is added. And we can see that for most of the regions, the hydrogen production potential is bigger than in Germany itself, because we have like larger surfaces and sometimes also like higher suitability factors of these kind of regions. So for example, let's say here, if we're taking a look at Northern Europe, we can produce more or supply more than 100 million tons of hydrogen to Germany for costs then less than €4 if we have like an implementation of salt cavern storage, which is like very big. And now it's getting even more interesting if we're taking a closer look on the other regions we have considered in our study, and this is shown here. So for example, Northern Africa is the yellow line, which is very close to the European countries, has like a significantly bigger hydrogen production and supply potential, in this case to Germany, due to the reason that the spaces are way bigger than in Germany, and the spaces is not used so much so far. Like in Germany, we already have like a lot of used land for agriculture, for cities and so on. While, for example, in Algeria and the desert, there are a lot of space available where we can still implement the renewable electricity production and therefore also hydrogen production. So we can see the potential in Northern Africa, but also in the clustered other African region is like around 1,000 million tons of green hydrogen production per year. And this is very big. And for example, now we can make an assessment, or we can compare it to the maximum projected hydrogen demand in Germany in 2050, and we can see it's around like 25 million tons in Germany. So if we could produce 1,000 million tons of hydrogen per year, we can see the potential is significantly higher than the projected hydrogen demand in Germany in 2050, and also it's bigger than the worldwide projected demand of green hydrogen in 2050, and therefore maybe also the key takeaway from a perspective, from an African perspective, for example, like that there are tremendous potential to fuel or to cover the world hydrogen energy demand by green hydrogen production in Africa, and this also to a very low cost. So this can be, how can I say it? There we have like a very big economic potential. Meanwhile, in Germany, our potential is so limited in comparison to that we cannot be an energy exporter in the future, and that's maybe a big difference. And here in the end, you can see also the primary energy demand worldwide in 2021. So this what the potentials here in these kind of regions we have considered would not have been sufficient to cover this kind of energy demand. However, if we take, for example, if we would have like taken a closer look to the whole African country, or to other regions and continents in the world, we can see it's also easily possible to cover the primary energy demand hypothetically just by hydrogen in the future, because there's a lot of space available. And also here you can see like a little conclusion of the main statement of this kind of slide, but I was already talking about it a lot, and maybe just to add one thing, due to the reason that also in the future there might be some kind of additional space needed also for the pure electricity generation, so not only used for hydrogen, but also for the electricity sector itself. We think it's the technical hydrogen production potential, or let's say the sustainable hydrogen production potential in Germany is not self-sufficient, and therefore there will be a need to import green energy and still import energy in the future to Germany. And big question here is, will it be just from other European regions, or will it be also like from other regions and continents from the world, as we do nowadays? Okay, so this was like now a lot of content. Now I would like to proceed with the key conclusions. And here you can see again the questions we raised in the beginning of the presentation. And the first one was like, if hydrogen production costs below €2 per kilogram are realistic in the future. And here the conclusion can be that a production of hydrogen for a cost of €2 in the future is possible. However, it's just possible in the best locations of the regions we have assessed. And if we also consider the transportation, and in this case to Germany, it's more likely that we achieve hydrogen cost around €3 per kilogram. Then the second one was, question was about which regions are the most favorable for green hydrogen supply if we want to transport this kind of hydrogen to Germany. And there we could identify the most promising regions are the Western Sahara, Central Algeria, and the North Sea. And these kind of regions show the lowest hydrogen supply costs to Germany, which have been less than €3 per kilogram of hydrogen if we're going to use salt cavern storage. And this kind of salt cavern storage was also like the main topic of the third question. And here we could see like the influence of using salt cavern storage is very, very big. And it can reduce the hydrogen production cost significantly, especially for regions which have like a high seasonality of the solar radiation and low wind speeds, which is, for example, the case for Italy or Spain. And therefore, there we can see a hydrogen production cost reduction about 50%, which is like, yeah, very, very, very big. And last but not least, it's the question if the domestic hydrogen production potential is self-sufficient in Germany. And here we can see, okay, if we just assess the technical hydrogen production potential itself, it can be doable. However, there might be some doubts because we have like the competition of spaces with other green energy carriers or green electricity. And therefore, in the end, we can draw here the key conclusion that it seems to be questionable that Germany can be in the future self-sufficient. And therefore, we think that in the future, there will be still some energy imports needed to cover the energy demand. And when we're talking about imports, we think like, for example, imports from Western Sahara, Central Algeria, and the North Sea can be like a very, very interesting option because there we would have like the lowest green hydrogen supply cost to Germany. Okay, so this was my presentation about cost minimized hydrogen production. And as I said also during my presentation, if you have more questions about like the technical results of this kind of hydrogen production system, feel also free to ask question here. And also, of course, I'm happy about all the other questions. And yeah, with this, I would like to close my presentation and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sens. Interesting presentation. I'll now open up the floor to the speaker and panelists, please. If I could have your videos on, then that will be great. So to the house, welcome back. Do we have any questions? Okay, silence. I'll go ahead and ask a very simple question. You might have alluded to this, Dr. Lucas Sens, but I'll ask anyway. So I kept hearing the term salt cavern scenario. What does that look like?
Okay, you say what does it look like if we're going to use salt caverns, or?
Yeah, so, you know, as a spa enthusiast, I know about salt grottos, but I don't know anything about salt caverns. So if you could enlighten me and maybe the rest of the house on what that looks like.
Okay, so we can use like these kind of geological formations like salt caverns to store energy. Like nowadays, we already use salt caverns, for example, in Germany to store natural gas. And in the future, we can also use these kind of salt caverns to store green hydrogen. There are like a lot of evaluations that it's possible to also store hydrogen in these kind of salt formations. And to do so, we have like these kind of salt formations, and you need to need to wash out the salt with a lot of water. And so let's just take out the salt from these kind of salt caverns, and then you have like a this kind of storage system which can be used to store hydrogen inside. And due to the reason that you just need to wash out the salt and install some kind of overground facilities, the specific storage costs are significantly lower than, for example, if you're using a pressure tank, because for the pressure tank, you would also need the whole material around. And here we are just using the geological formations as this kind of storage material. And therefore, cost of hydrogen salt caverns are significantly lower. And if we want to implement these kind of salt caverns in an energy system, of course, we would also need like a pipeline network so that these kind of salt cavern storages are connected over pipelines to the production sites and also to the demand sites.
Got you. Thank you so much for answering my question. Okay, I see Professor Brando's hands up. Could you switch on your camera, please, and ask your question? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Sens, for this presentation. Actually, I learned so much from it, really. I actually have 3 questions, is that possible, madam?
Let's see how we go. I don't see any other hands up, so it looks like we have a lot of time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the first question has to do with the equation you put up on slide 8, even though you did say that you don't want to go into details, but there are 2 components in that equation which stands out for me. The first has to do with the CapEx part of the equation and the OpEx part of it. How do you generate data to, plug that into the model and come up with something reasonable?
Okay, here we used like learning curves. So for example, for wind power or PV panels, let's say PV panels, we know right now that we have like a specific installed power. And then in the future, like for the year 2035, there are some projections that it will increase like 6 or 7 times. And then we can use the learning rate, which is stated in the literature. And based on the doublings of the installed capacities, we can assess how the cost decline of the capex cost, for example, of the PV panels will be. And we did this for all the components, just to try to make some kind of future projections. And of course, there's like a big uncertainty because nobody knows in the future, okay, how will the raw material price be, and so on and so on. Yeah, that's how we did it. But if we're talking about cost projections in the future, yeah, it's always clear that there's some kind of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine if you took that data, the CapEx and the OpEx that comes out of an installation in Africa, because this is where your focus really is, that equation changes significantly, correct?
Like for the capex cost, we did not consider a variation for the different regions. So we have like a fixed capex. So it doesn't matter if we're assuming to have the PV panel built up in Germany or in Western Nigeria, for example. Here we have like a fixed capex cost, and we did not differentiate, for example, between like different costs for labor or something like this. So
even taxes. Yeah, even taxes.
Taxes we have not considered at all, because if we would consider like different taxes, here we want to have like how you say it. We want to have like a comparison, not based on subsidies or taxes, but just on a level playing field, and therefore we have not considered taxes or anything like this. No.
Okay. Okay. The other point, my other question, if you don't mind, madam. Yeah. So on slide 18, the impression I have when I look at that data is that it really doesn't matter really from where in Africa you get your hydrogen, whether it's from West Sahara or from the entire Maghreb region or from Kenya or from South Africa. The cost impact is insignificant really. So basically, you can actually have hydrogen being shipped from Cameroon to Germany at the same costs almost as if you were going to ship it from South Africa.
Yes, I mean, I have not taken a closer look to South Africa yet, just to the region which I have shown. But due to the reason that the solar radiation varies not so much on the considered regions in Africa I have in my presentation. And since photovoltaic is the lowest cost option to produce electricity, and we don't have like a big seasonality of our solar radiation in the African regions, in the end, the hydrogen production costs are in a very, very similar bandwidth. Yeah, they're very interesting result. And I would say, if we're talking about shipping, it's maybe, yeah, the cost might be higher than if you're using a pipeline transportation network. So just like to add a note here, like if we're shipping, we assume that the hydrogen transportation costs are maybe like around €1 higher than for pipeline transportation. But in the end, and also I really like this kind of idea about like a green energy systems, like the energy world market would be not just focused on like single, let's say, oil producers or oil countries like it's nowadays, but like way more countries would have the potential to produce cheap or low cost green energy, because in the end, it's mainly based on the solar radiation or cheap wind speeds. And there, like a lot of countries have a lot of potentials and space available.
And then my last question, I noticed also on that plot, on slide 18, that Australia and South America was not considered. And these are actually regions where, from a price competitive point of view, would compete strongly with Africa in terms of production of hydrogen, green hydrogen.
Yeah, in terms of hydrogen production costs, for sure. For example, like in Patagonia and Southern America, there are outstanding wind resources. So they could reach like similar or maybe even lower hydrogen production costs. However, when it comes to the transportation, a transportation per pipeline from hydrogen from Patagonia to Europe is not economic viable. So there, a shipping would be needed. And since shipping is higher in costs than the pipeline transportation, like from a European perspective, it would be cheaper to have like a green hydrogen supply over a pipeline network from Africa than from Southern America or from Australia, because the shipping costs are just higher. And therefore, like the distance between the demand and production sites also matters. Even if we're going to talk about ammonia or LHCs or whatever, or liquid hydrogen, in our assessment, these kind of costs are always higher than if we use it shipping than if we have a pipeline network. However, maybe just to add, like from a geopolitical or geostrategic view, it's sometimes better to have like a higher flexibility, let's say to get the green hydrogen over a shipping route, than just have one fixed pipeline, because we are experienced right now with the war in Ukraine and the gas shortage, that there are like other equations which are important to consider if it comes to energy supply.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter if that pipeline is running from East Africa all the way to Europe.
It depends on the distance. I mean, we have like a distance function, but if we have like consider like this very big import pipelines, transportation costs just slightly increasing over the distance. Of course, it would be always, transportation costs would be always lower if we import it from, let's say, Morocco or Algeria. So it's we would have to a closer look on the heat maps I've shown, like how much smaller are the hydrogen production costs, for example, in Central Africa than compared to Northern Africa, and then adding up the transportation costs. And then in the end, we can see which region would be favored in terms of hydrogen supply costs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Got you. Thank you so much, Professor Brando, for your questions, and Dr. Sens for answering. I know I had a question from Dr. Obodo. Do you want to go ahead and ask your questions, please?
Hello?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah. So I'm just going to, this is still piggybacking on what Brando was saying. The level of uncertainty in your model can actually disrupt the cost projection. From what I gathered, you said you did not consider the level of uncertainty. What kind of level of uncertainty do you have in your model projection with regards to costs from different parts of Africa or costs from Africa and Europe?
Well, it's hard to assess which kind of uncertainties we have in our model. In another, like in the publication, we also considered the, let's say, progressive and conservative scenarios. So if we're talking about, for example, the capex for the photovoltaic panels, which is like important parameters, some literature states them to be like 300 euros, some state them to be like 150 euros per kilowatt hour peak power. And there comes like a uncertainty in terms of the actual cost, if we're talking about 2 euros per kilowatt hydrogen or 1.50 euro. However, like what we have seen, even if we consider like different cost inputs, the relation between the different regions and the relations of the key conclusions, they are still the same. So what I want to say there, it's like maybe it's better to take a closer look on the relation between the different region and to the key conclusion to then say, okay, the hydrogen production cost in Algeria will be €2.21. Okay, nobody can forecast this. So it's more about the relation between the different regions.
So now you're bringing something very crucial. You're talking about relative cost. You're no longer talking about absolute cost, because from your model, the uncertainty in cost in production in Algeria and in Germany, there are so many uncertainty factors from your CapEx to your OpEx, like your labor consideration. So this will definitely affect the actual cost of hydrogen production. So when you say hydrogen production in Algeria, say you in pressurized tank, it would come to about 2.5 euros, and then you say in Germany it's about 5 euros. These values, these absolute values are actually not right. Is that what you're saying right now?
No, I'm not saying that they are not right, and I would disagree that there will be such a big difference, because if we take, for example, a look on the labor cost, if we take the labor cost will be a fraction of, let's say, 1% or 2% more on the hydrogen production cost or less. So this influence is like not so big. It's more, let's say, about the investment of the technologies. But of course, if you want to consider like a whole region, of course you have uncertainties. You always becomes natural that you have uncertainties, and this kind of results can help you to identify regions which are beneficial or not. And then the next step would be like to do like a very detailed model of just one location and to assess there like in a more specific way the hydrogen production costs. But for these kind of system studies, we always have these kind of uncertainties, and we always need to bear them in mind. But there are no ways to consider all these kind of uncertainties without letting the complexity explode.
So this is where I just want to piggyback on that. It would be better to use your cost as relative cost rather than absolute cost because of the level of uncertainties in the model.
I mean, everybody can have a different opinion on this. So we can just state relative values. What is also important for us in this work here is that there are like a lot of reports which are stating, okay, their cost reachable of let's say €1 per kilogram. And like from a scientific view, I think it's easier to defend this kind of work if we just show relative costs. However, I think it's also important for the public just to say, okay, when we calculate with these kind of values, we will reach these kind of costs. And in the end, you can change the cost input, and then you will reach other costs. But I think it's also important to show absolute numbers. Always have in mind that there are uncertainties, but also just to show like which kind of values can be reached. Because for industry, for example, it doesn't make, it's not so important to have the relations, but it's also for them maybe important, okay, is it more like 2 years or 4 years what we can expect? And of course there are uncertainties, but it can give like an indication where to go and which kind of direction of course we can go.
All right.
All right, I'm just going to let other speakers ask their questions, and I can have more comments going forward.
Thanks, Dr. Obodo. I see a question in the chat from Draogo. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question? I don't see you on my screen. So while you're preparing for that, I'll go to Michael Clanton, please, and then I'll come to you, Dr. Umar, if I may.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for that. I had a quick question. I think it's one question, but it may lead to two. It's all related. It kind of piggybacks on your question, Michelle. Dr. Sen, if I'm saying your name correctly. Hi, I'm Mike Clanton. My question for you is regarding I'm back to the salt caverns. And I'm glad Michelle asked for the deep dive into the salt caverns. I wasn't aware that, because this is new, that you have to remove the salt from the caverns. Just doing some research here, I found that Germany has a large plethora of salt, of area for storage, which is great. But I was just wondering about the ecological balance of that by removing the salt and then washing the salt out. Has there been any studies in that, and has that been attributed to the cost? And my other question, and then the slide, I don't remember the slide number, my apologies, but in the other slide you had the same slide, you had the salt caverns, and then you had the storage pressure tanks or something like that. So the storage pressure tanks, is that in lieu of if you don't have underground caverns? Is that what I'm understanding?
For the second question, yes, like if we just assume like pressure tanks, we cannot use salt cavern as hydrogen storage, so we can just have like artificial storage like in pipeline systems or overground or underground storage tanks. And for the first, we're also familiar like with the salt problem if you wash it out. We have not considered this in our study, and it's also not our field of our institute to do like, let's say, the impact of the ecological impact of washing out salt caverns. So I'm not an expert with this, so I cannot answer this. But I would say in the past, it was possible to build up this kind of salt cavern storage without having like major damage in the nature. So I would assume that it's also possible in the future, and I would think that they will try to wash out the salt maybe in the ocean and then have like a very quick distribution of the salt in the ocean, and that there will be just minor environmental impacts.
Thank you, Dr. Sens, for your answer.
Thank you.
Dr. Omar, you're on. Could you please ask your question?
Yes. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Sens, for the nice presentation that you've given us, including the background that you gave us, because for us here in Africa, we really have lots of potential, especially with these natural and renewable energy sources. We even have towns named after wind. We even name our kids after the sun, and all those other things because of the potential that we do have. However, for us, we find like, especially on the CapEx side, it is normally more conceptual than really practical, because, you know, we have these unique energy challenges that we have here in Africa. So I wanted to ask specifically on your cost as well, like your levelized cost of hydrogen, for instance. You find like you are not factoring competing technologies. Like you are not factoring the other colors of hydrogen in the spectrum, you see, because it can be cheaper for South Africa to produce and export gray hydrogen than to produce green hydrogen or turquoise hydrogen, for instance. So, and then also like when it comes to the storage, is it possible for you also to include other forms of storage in your model? Like for us, where we are now, we are looking at chemical storage of hydrogen, for instance, because with the salt aspect, you will still have to electrolyze the salt itself so that you can extract the hydrogen. So now when you go now further to calculate the levelized cost of electricity or the levelized cost of the energy itself, it now becomes way, way, way higher than the 5 or 6 euros you are talking about. Is it possible to cover like the technology when it comes to the utilization as well, so that we can have a true reflection of the actual cost of the hydrogen that you indicated? Another thing that maybe we needed to consider, it's like, have you considered, for example, the case of storing the hydrogen in the form of ammonia or in the form of methane, or for instance, and stuff like that? Because these are some of the challenges we are grappling with, especially in South Africa, because for us now, the current cost of producing hydrogen is around $8 to $10. But in your case, it appears to be a little lower. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, a lot of questions. I try to answer all of them. And maybe let's start with the first one. I remember, like, in this kind of, in our work, we just focus on green hydrogen. So of course, if we want, you can also display it against blue hydrogen, gray hydrogen, and so on. But we're just focusing on green hydrogen. And the next step would be maybe now just to gather the results from other studies for gray hydrogen and blue hydrogen. And then you can compare like the cost of these kind of options. Like the second question was like, or what I remember, like, okay, that costs are right now significantly higher in South Africa. Like the capex projections we used is for 2035. So due to the expected reduction in cost for PV panels, electrolyzers, and so on, our hydrogen production costs are also lower. And we have not taken into consideration ammonia, liquid hydrogen, or methanol, or methane, for example. We have done like a previous research on these kind of hydrogen supply chains, and there the clear result is like the lowest cost hydrogen transportation option, let's say like this, is always a gaseous hydrogen transport over pipelines. And ammonia, for example, is significantly higher in cost because of the heat demand for the cracking and of the purification losses after the cracking. For liquid hydrogen, the costs are higher for the technology of the liquid hydrogen carrier ship, for the liquefaction unit, and so on. So we did like a previous assessment where we could see like pipeline transportation is by far the lowest cost option. And therefore we have not included in this kind of presentation the transportation of hydrogen over ammonia or other fuels or hydrogen carriers. However, right now, if we're taking a closer look on realized project or statements in Germany, we can see that there are some kind of hydrogen supply projects using ammonia, just due to the reason we can use ammonia already as a green fuel maybe in the future, or we can use ammonia in the fertilizer industry, for example. So in the beginning, we have like a no regret infrastructure if we're going to use ammonia, because we have more applications. While for green hydrogen, we need to be sure that we have like a green hydrogen demand in Germany. So there's also a difference between like the research here and what's going to be implemented right now in Germany or like in Europe. And about the storage options, we just have considered the storage of gaseous hydrogen, also no conditioning, what I said. So if we would condition for example, hydrogen to LOHC, so we would hydrogenate the hydrogen to organic carrier, the costs from our previous assessment would be also higher. And therefore, in this case, we just stayed on the gaseous hydrogen supply chains and storage options. And yeah, That's all I remember from your questions.
Okay, Dr. Umar, did you get all your questions answered?
Yes, thank you.
Super. Interesting debate, stroke statements. Professor Brando, I see you, but before we go to you, I have a question in the chat here. Any one of you could answer this question. It says, what are the peculiarities of salt caverns for hydrogen production? That's one, and we've talked about that already. Part two to that question was, is it possible to use mining boreholes for the same purposes for the Africa case scenario? So in Germany, we're talking about salt caverns. In Africa, could we use mining boreholes, caves? I don't know. Can anybody take that question?
Okay, I mean, I can talk a little bit about this. I'm also not an expert in geological hydrogen storage, sure. But what I learned so far from the experts is like, since hydrogen is the smallest molecule in the world or in the universe, it's can go through like little holes very, very easily. So we need to be sure that these kind of geological formations are completely closed. And with salt formation, because of the specific structures, what I know about salt formations, they are completely closed. However, we cannot store, for example, hydrogen in another geological formation where we could already store methane, and therefore I would assume that we cannot store green hydrogen in mining boreholes or whatever, because they would not. There would be too many hydrogen losses because they could not cover. Yeah.
Okay, good answer. Thank you so much. Super grateful. Professor Brando, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted us to touch a bit more on the cost part of it. Dr. Omar says that in South Africa, their costing model, puts them somewhere between 8 and 10 US dollars per kilogram. Correct? Is that what you said?
Yes, correct.
Yes, and here in Germany, please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Sens, we're already somewhere between 9 and 13 euros per kilogram, depending on where you get your hydrogen from. Correct?
You mean like nowadays green hydrogen or gray hydrogen?
I would say nowadays gray hydrogen.
Before the energy crisis, I would say it was realistic. Right now, I don't know, because natural gas is more expensive. So I would also assume that maybe gray hydrogen would be more like 18 euros per kilogram. But yeah. It's a similar. I would say like the direction of the cost is right. You can fuel your car at hydrogen filling stations before the energy crisis for 9 euros per kilogram of hydrogen, or 12 euros. So
yeah, I just wanted to comment on, just to give perspective. You've heard Dr. Sens say you can actually fuel your car with hydrogen here in Germany. And for each kilogram, you get about 100 kilometers per kilogram. So just to give you perspective of, where we are in terms of competitiveness between hydrogen as an energy carrier in the transportation sector and what we currently use, petrol, diesel, and all whatnot. Okay. Good.
Good perspective. Thank you. I don't see any more questions up. So at this point, I'd like to draw the webinar to a close. It really was an interesting topic. I did learn a whole lot. I want to say a special thank you to Dr. Sens, one, for the very simplistic, easy to understand presentation, and to our panelists, Dr. Umar and Dr. Obodo, for asking some really, practical, pragmatic questions, and also for Dr. Sens again for trying to answer them as objectively as possible. At this point, I say thank you to everyone for joining the webinar. I do know that this webinar will be published on our website via our YouTube channel. I have just dropped the link in the chat. So for those of you who would want to go revisit the webinar again, then please feel free to do so. So at this point, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have people join and ask several questions. Thank you for going on this journey with us, and wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, rather. Thanks, everyone.
you.
Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And take the blame.